International Film Festival with Leonardo DiCaprio. But you know what? You're in the right place because we have just a wonderful panel here this evening. And for those of you who don't know, the Santa Barbara Latina Leaders Network is a recently formed group of women leaders that have come together to support each other in pursuing our professional and our personal development goals. And it's not just about supporting each other, it's about providing each other with the resources from within the network, but also from within the community to continue to be able to do so. And this last year, the network organized 6 workshops, or I like to call them knowledge sessions, where we were able to learn about different topics that are important to women leadership development. And so today is really a continuation of that. Today we're going to focus on the topic of strengthening relationships through alliances and consensus building. And this was one of the topics that rated really high on the list in terms of members' needs. In terms of the survey, 98.7 people wanted to know more about this interesting and engaging topic. And so today, to explore this topic, we have a wonderful panel of women leaders here today. And they're going to answer some of our burning questions that we have. Today we're going to find out how effective leaders build consensus. And when the steering committee, we had a small steering committee, and when we were coming up with different questions for them, we wanted to know what is the importance of establishing collaborations and alliances. These are words we hear every day. We're asked to collaborate. This is a collaboration. Partnerships and so forth. So what does this all really mean? And as women leaders, what are effective strategies for building consensus? Another question is, how do we define consensus building? What does it mean to you or to you? There might be different, you might have a completely different perspective. And then equally important, how do you manage situations when you are unable to reach consensus? How do you continue to nurture those relationships and to move a group forward or an idea or that shared vision? How do we do all this? These are the burning questions for our panel today. And so today we have a panel of 3 great leaders, Dr. Lori Gaskin, Judy Guillermo-Newton, and Monique Limon. I really want to thank them for being here, for taking time out of their really busy schedule, and really sharing your experiences for the benefit of everyone. Because I think a lot of times it's through others' experiences that we really learn a lot about ourselves. So thank you very much. And before I introduce each panelist, I just want to let you know that each one will have a chance to speak on this topic, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. So I really encourage you that as you hear them, you jot down any questions or comments so that we're ready to go with questions. Okay? And so I think we'll already start. Are we?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So I will start by introducing Dr. Lori Gaskin. And as many of you know, Dr. Gaskin is currently president of Santa Barbara City College. She has tremendous experience, over 30 years of experience in the community college education. She previously was the president for the West Valley College in Saratoga, California. And she also held various leadership positions at Lake Tahoe Community College, serving as the vice president of academic affairs, student services. She was the dean there as well. And she's super active in this community. She's only been here, I want to say, maybe a little over 2 years. And she serves on almost every board or advisory council. I can't name them all, but some of them are Cottage Care Health Systems, United Way, Partners in Education, the Scholarship Foundation, the YMCA, you name it, she's there. However, I also want to let you know that when we're introducing people, we like to know a little bit about themselves also, because we like to know what's in their bio, but what is not in their bio. That's also important, right? And so Dr. Gaskin is a true lover of nature. She loves birds, she loves plants, she loves botany, she's a runner, and she enjoys pizza and McConnell's ice cream. So without further ado, Dr. Lori Gaskin.
Oh my gosh, I really even can't follow that, but thank you, Gabe, very much. I want to say that if Guille is an exemplary an exemplar of the leadership in this room, then our community, our region, our state, our nation, and in fact our world is in very, very, very good hands. You all, I can see in your faces and in your spirit and what has been shared with me, that you are an amazing group of women and men as well. What's particularly important to me is this alliance, this collaborative that allows us to learn from each other and to mentor each other. So I freely open my door, my text, my phone, my cell phone to any and all of you. If you ever want to chat, if you ever want to go for coffee, I don't drink coffee, but tea is good. Or if you want to meet at McConnell's and just talk about what it means to be a woman leader, I would love to do that because my goal is nurturing the future to come. So that's just an introductory comment. I never follow directions, so I'm sorry about that. But I will follow the directions about 10 minutes. But yes, we did have a set of questions, but I have to frame the context of strengthening leadership, strengthening our role as leaders through collaboration and alliances and consensus building in the construct and the framework of what I call synergy. So I want you to think about synergy for a moment. What is synergy? It's a scientific word, but I want to take it into the social construct. What's synergy? Anybody remember their science background?
The whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes. So if I take an individual and his or her contributions in a vacuum, and I take an individual and his or her contributions in a vacuum, that's all well and good. But if I can pull these individuals together, those elemental parts are additive to the point that that additive, that conglomerate exceeds the sum of the individual parts. And to me, that's what collaboration, alliances, and I'm going to drop consensus building because I actually don't believe in it, and that's not a negative. But so I'm going to really focus on collaboration and alliance. Well, so what happens in the absence of synergy, or in the absence of alliances or collaboration? What happens? What do we get in the absence of that?
Polarization.
I'm sorry?
Polarization.
Polarization. What else? Do we see that in Washington, D.C., maybe? No, yeah, right. What else do we see with an absence of synergy and an absence of collaboration, besides polarization? What else? Yeah, Reggie.
Lack of shared knowledge.
Lack of shared knowledge. What else?
Silos.
Sorry?
Silos.
Silos.
Disintegration.
Disintegration instead of integration. Exclusion. Perhaps we're not making our best decisions, or we're not reaching an outcome that's as robust as it could be. So now let's flip it. When we have that synergy, when we have that alliance, what do we get? What do we get? Inclusion, integration, harmony, maybe more buy-in, productivity. Maybe the outcomes are more robust, they're richer, they're more vibrant, whatever those outcomes are. And that's what I've learned over my 34 years in education. Education is a very siloing experience. I have my classroom, and I'm a geologist. I taught in my class, I had my college students, and life is good. When you start going into leadership, you start seeing that you've got to create a collective, because that's how visions, not my vision, the institution's vision is realized and actualized. And so it was a learned thing for me. I'm very good at saying, okay, you guys, we're going to do this, we're going to learn this, and this is how we're going to do it. But that doesn't work, and it particularly doesn't work with individuals who are accustomed to that dialogue, that shared consensus building. So I wanted to frame it in that context. The case study in 2 minutes that I'm going to share with you, and this doesn't leave the room. Anyone? Gretchen? And yeah, right. It doesn't leave the room. Michael, where's Michael? Yeah. But anyway, and maybe you can attest to this. In colleges, there is a structure that is known as participative governance, where each constituent has a voice, whether it's the faculty or the staff or the administration or the students. And it's all a collective. And that emanates toward a body where all of those voices come together. In our institution, that body is called the College Planning Council. When I got there, it didn't feel as if it was empowered to engage in those conversations. It didn't feel inclusive. It didn't feel as if there was that shared experience leading to a collective decision. And so I sought very, very hard. This hasn't been the first time I've had to do this. I sought very hard to empower and nurture that. So I wanted to answer how I did that. I had my own questions. Thank you though for seeding them. Synergy, alliance building, relationship development. For me, it's all steeped in a couple of really foundational values, and one is trust and respect. You've got to have genuine, authentic respect and trust for those with whom you work or you engage. And for me, that's fundamental and foundational. The second thing is an appreciation for a person's contribution. I never assume that there's any malintent in anyone's contribution, that the person has only good intentions. I may disagree, but it's only a disagreement out of an academic or a dialogue nature. The third principle is that I have to create an environment that's safe for people to share their opinions, safe for that inclusion, safe for that alliance building. If people are fearful of contributing for whatever reason, you're not going to get that connectivity. The fourth thing is I have to, and I fundamentally believe it, speak from the heart about the value of synergy and the value of collectiveness. And I do that in every aspect of my leadership, from things that are silly, such as bringing Klondike bars to our convocation or all-campus kickoff, to creating bowling leagues for the college, to also integrating everybody into the process of coming together, to breaking bread together, to all of those things that begin to build those relationships. The other thing I fundamentally believe in order to nurture these alliances is I'm really a believer in process. I would collectively develop our process for getting from point A to point B, include people in that process, and then that yields an outcome where people feel included. Now notice I'm not saying that people get to the same point, that there may not be consensus, but if people's voices are genuinely and authentically heard and validated, and if they're celebrated, then the outcome is simply a rich product of all of that dialogue that takes place. The other value is listening, authentic listening. Absolutely have to listen. And you have to listen not because you're being forced to, but because people have really valuable things to share and contribute. And then finally, that relationship of connectivity, synergy is built on a value that you're empowering people to engage, you're nurturing that engagement, you're walking the talk, you're seeing it, you're feeling it, and you're participating in it. The two caveats I want to end with, see my time, there are two caveats to inclusion and to synergy and to alliance building. And one is, which is sometimes hard for people to recognize, that along with the privilege of participating is the expectation of shouldering responsibility and accountability. And that's really important. Sometimes, not very often, People at the college will say, well, you make the decision. You make it. And that's fine, I can make any decision. But that's not the point. The point is, we need to work through this together. We need to reach some common endpoint. And we need to implement that and share that as a shared responsibility. Not that I don't shoulder those responsibilities, I do. But then the second caveat is you may not reach a collective outcome. Absolutely may not reach a collective outcome. And then you have to have the strength of character, the integrity, the strength of purpose, the clarity of who you are as a leader to make those decisions. So that is mine in a 10-minute nutshell, but I'll be happy to share my cell phone with anyone. Text me, don't email me, because I respond much better to text. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori, for your true candor and just explaining things that in the manner that you do and giving us those golden rules that you live by, those authentic rules. So thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce to you Judy Guillermo-Newton, who I had the pleasure of meeting just last year. And Judy's the Senior VP of Organizational Development and Human Resources at Montecito Bank and Trust. And there, she's part of the executive committee, and she leads the all of the leadership development at the bank. She has over 20 years of experience also working in a vast number of different locations. She worked at UCSB, serving a part of their student services with their academic administration. And she also, very interestingly enough, served as UCSB Ombudsman, am I saying that correctly? And I had to look that word up because I did not know what that is, and that's a person that finds resolutions to really complicated situations. So we're very excited to have her here today. Judy also has a lot of experience with being a mediator. She's a trained mediator and a marriage, family, child therapist as well. So she brings a wealth of knowledge to all of us, and I'm happy to introduce her next. And we're very lucky to have her here this week because next week she's headed to the Philippines, where she's going to be visiting family, friends, and scuba diving, and she'll come back to Santa Barbara to see her two grandkids. So thank you.
It's funny when people ask, share something about yourself, and then you hear, sit back and think, oh, wow. And I want to say ditto to Lori just got finished saying. I think there were so many important caveats in that in terms of looking at what we do to strengthen our alliances. And it really, to me, boils down into relationship building. The women in this room, and the men too, I mean, relationship building is something that we do all the time. We've started, for most of us, it started in our family units. We have families in which you build relationships. You take those same sorts of skills, hopefully, and you apply them to your professional lives and the work that you do within our community. Now, when I studied psychology, the area that I studied was family systems. And it has been really interesting to me because family systems, which I use when I was a therapist, is also what I use when I do organizational development. Because it's all about systems. It's how all of us connect, interrelate, build relationships, find things that work, don't work. And in the work that I do, in terms of organizational development, that's the kinds of things I'm doing. At UCSB, when I was the ombudsman, it was looking at these complex situations that occur and figuring out, what is happening, where's the disconnect, how do you look at it, how do you look at the gaps, and it was very interesting work, and I realized that consensus building is something that I have seen happen throughout my career. And when I think about consensus building, I don't always think about that as getting to yes. I think about that as really talking out situations. Sometimes when people talk about consensus, it's all getting everybody together. And what happens is we get like people who think alike together to think about the same thing, and nobody is in there challenging. And I think that when I am really faced with a complex situation and when I have seen the best consensus building happen, I want in the room people who think differently than I do, that maybe have a different perspective about what it is that I'm looking at, it be an idea, a relationship, a view, an agenda. Because I want somebody in there who is really going to help me to see a in that dialogue, much of the time, different opinions come out that can make one idea become better, that synergistic energy that we're already alluded to. That's very important in terms of getting an idea better. It's kind of like moving from a good idea to a great idea. It's how do you do that? It's by eliciting other people's perspectives and views. And in that dialogue, what often happens is that you hear from people you would never think. You have similarities in what you're really thinking and saying in certain areas. So it's trying to find the places, the intersections of how people see things. Or in their differences, how do we come to a resolution that most of us can buy into? Now, some of the time, what Lori says is there's a very clear decision that needs to be made by a leader. That happens a lot. And it's really difficult when you know you have parties that are really differing. And the more that people are emotionally caught in that decision, or the more important it is, the more rigid people get in their ideas. And at some point in time as leaders, you have to have the courage to make the decision that's very difficult. But what I need to hear when we're doing consensus building or looking at collaborative thinking is all the ideas in the room. Because as a leader, it's not just my idea, it's the idea of the group. And that's part of that relationship building. It was very fun for me to come in today and see people from different walks of my life, to see people I knew at UCSB, to see friends of my daughters that went to high school here, that people that I have worked with in different places. It's kind of funny for me to think of myself as a corporate speaker, because I've been in the corporate world for about 7 years, and it's still interesting to me to think, how did I ever get to a bank? And how I got to a bank, which is really interesting, is that Montecito Bank and Trust really thinks about the community. And so the community is what took me into Montecito Bank and Trust, and our interest in the community, and being parts of things like this, not counting my money. I remember the very first meeting I went to, we were talking about NSF, and I had just come from 25 years in university, and all I could think is the National Science Foundation, and nothing was making sense. I remember writing a little note to the CFO, and I go, NSF, what is that? He goes, non-sufficient funds. And I thought, whoa, I am really in a different world. And he looked at me like, whoa, where are you coming from? So, you know, those were the kinds of things, and our CEO, Jan Rufus, one of the things and reasons she brought me there is she said, I need a different voice at the table. Sometimes I have to remind her when I get beat up because I'm a different voice at the table. But that was really an important ingredient. So when we're thinking about our alliances and who we're interacting with and what we're building, is don't just replicate yourself and your own ideas. It's important to have that. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have that support or think people who really help you in your thinking, but at the same time, choose people who challenge you. Choose people from whom you can learn things so that you can be a stronger leader, a better leader. I think that's a critical part of what we bring and strengthen in our alliance building, is having people who bring many different ideas to the table so it is inclusive. That inclusivity that Lori talked about is really important, and it's important to figure out how do we foster it, and absolutely, positively, without a doubt, it's built on trust and respect. Without trust and respect, you don't have an environment where people feel safe enough. You know when you've gone somewhere that truly people say, well, give me your ideas, but they don't want them. You know what that's like. And you know what it's also like when people say, give me your ideas, and they hear them. You know, sometimes it's hard. I was thinking of a meeting I was in the other day. I don't have to look, I don't think there's anyone here. Where really I get, hey, Judy, keep your face neutral, keep your face neutral. You don't like this idea at all. But it was important for me to hear. It was important for me to listen. That doesn't mean I have to change my position or agree, but I have to listen and hear their perspective, because that's what's expected of me if I'm going to be a good leader. So that's the broadening thing I think that we really need to think about in terms of consensus and relationship building and building our alliances. And there are some times that when we think about the alliances we're building, is to think, what kind of alliance do I really need? Do I need someone who's, at this point in time, powerful, that can help me, that's influential, that is numbers of people? I mean, it depends on your issues, your agenda, what you're trying to do, to think about the kind of alliance building you need to have. Community is have diversity in our community, we can have lots of ideas in the community, then we become a stronger community. And that's, again, when you talk about synergy, that's where strength comes from. And so what is important for us as leaders is to think, how do we draw from our strength? How do we listen? How do we invite people to participate with us and to join with us? Because without that, we can't move leaders.
Thank you, Judy. I think we're starting to hear, common themes with what we're hearing today about really listening and hearing what the other person is saying, because ultimately we all do want to be heard. Next, I'd like to introduce to you Monique Limon. And Monique Limon is the youngest board member of the Santa Barbara Unified School District. Many of you also know her as the Assistant Director of the McNair Scholar Program at UCSB. And we all know that Monique is a strong advocate for women's issues, and she's definitely a big proponent of equity in education. She's worked with numerous programs out at UCSB and has a lot of partnerships with a lot of different nonprofit organizations here in town. And she's a great supporter of the Santa Barbara Latina Leaders Network. One thing you don't know about Monique is that Monique loves banda music. I know we have a lot of banda music lovers in here. And she's a true fan of Juan Gabriel and Pepe Aguilar. Monique, welcome. Thank you. So I'm going to frame my comments more about what it's been like to be the youngest school board member in 146 years, and also what it's like to be a Latina in public office. And so I definitely want to, in some ways, I think my comments will add to what Dr. Gaskin and what Judy have shared with us. But they might, differ a little bit. And when I first got asked, well, think about consensus building and alliances, I went straight to my family. And I realized that as the eldest grandchild and coming from a mother who has 11 siblings and a father who has 10 siblings, alliance building and consensus building actually started a long time ago. And, I think back to my family, and I think back to those moments where we had to come together as a family and strategize on how to deliver tough news. I think of what happens when you have aging parents and aging grandparents and how the family collaborates to move forward on a situation. And definitely I think back to those moments where my brother and I definitely collaborated and became allies for things we probably shouldn't have become allies for. And my mother could attest to that. But I think that a lot of this actually comes from within, and it comes from different places. I don't think that just your professional capacity is the only place where you build these skills. You really start to build these skills early on. And I think they definitely helped me as a school board member. There are definitely things that I've been able to apply. I think about the importance of alliance building and collaborations as the importance for building relationships, for moving towards some kind of outcome. It doesn't mean that it's always the one you want, but some kind of outcome, and also for creating a more efficient process in how we do the work that we do. I think as a woman leader, it's been very important for me to understand the skills that we might be able to develop and bring forward to, because one of the things that's been interesting is that running for office put me in a very different capacity as far as thinking about my role in the community. But I also realized that I learned a lot about alliances and collaborations. There were times where the allies who I thought should be my allies were not. And there were times where the first people who were supporting me were not common allies. And so I think it helped me understand that we may go in thinking, gosh, well, Monique's a Latina and she's going to get all the Latina support. Wrong. My very first rejection for an endorsement, was made of a panel of women of color. And so I had to think about that. I had to think about what that meant for me and what it was like. And I had to think about the fact that sometimes, it was the white male Republican that reached out. And I was like, something's off here. How is this working? It's not always, what you think it is. But that's a good thing, because I think it doesn't limit you to believing that alliances and collaborations can only be created with those who are most familiar to you. It's been absolutely helpful being on the board to think about that and to think about what it means to moving issues forward. Being on a board, there are absolutely some issues where we take kind of the traditional consensus building aspect and we need the 5-0 vote. And there's others where you know consensus is going to be three votes. And so one of the things that's been interesting for me is knowing that not everybody had the same level of excitement coming as I came onto the school board. The excitement varied amongst my colleagues. But the great thing about this is that it's helped all of us think about what happens 4 years later. And the fact that you can actually, some of those people that weren't as excited all of a sudden can become your allies on certain issues that maybe you weren't allies before. And so being on the school board has given me that opportunity and it helped me think about that. I do think that as far as the strategies that come into place, in a school district with over 15,000 students, where the majority of the school district students are Latino students, and our board does not reflect that, how I talk about issues has been really important. I don't think I've ever been so aware about what I physically look like, what I sound like, how often I move my hands, how often I move my head, until I was in this particular space. And part of my reason for being so aware is not because I want to necessarily be, but because for me, what's most important to me is that we move forward on issues that are right for the students. And sometimes, whether I have a large community of parent speakers, or whether it's my own colleagues or an administration, or what have you, I need them to listen to me. And I think Dr. Gaskin touched about how important it is to listen. We forget that, and we sometimes don't listen. We're so prepared to rebuttal that we are not listening to what the person is saying. And sometimes we want the same goal. We want the same thing. We have different approaches. But I think it's, for me, being so aware of this has really meant, again, that is a way that I can influence that the conversation doesn't go into a direction that is going to be full of conflict, that's going to be really not efficient or productive. It's not good for our students. So it's been hard. It's absolutely been hard. I think that as a Latina woman, a young Latina woman, there's times where I realize, Monique, stop moving your head. Stop, don't use your hands so much. And I wonder, does everybody, is everybody on the dais thinking that? Are they aware of what they're saying? I think, the media shows up to our board meetings, we're in the paper occasionally, and I can almost guarantee you that if there's some issue that is perceived as a Latino issue, I'm going to be quoted. That's just the truth. And so how I come off is really important for me, but again, it's mostly important to me for the outcome, because I need the conversation to be about the students, to be about the teachers, and not to be about any disagreement. And so that has been something that I thought about, and that's been something that absolutely influences how I become an ally and how I collaborate. I think consensus building is definitely a process. I think in the ideal world, we want a certain outcome, but most of the time we're happy with a certain direction. And I think the alliance part is about building the relationships, and the collaboration is more about the partnerships. Both are needed, both are useful. And I think that there's things we do, again, on a regular basis, even though we're maybe not aware that we're doing it, even in our own kind of personal sphere. As far as managing situations where we're not able to reach that consensus, there's a few things that I think are important to me. Patience, the strategy, awareness, process, and leading from within, which is a term that I've kind of learned, and I've had to remind myself it's coming from a good place when it's coming from the heart. And I think I realized that it can really take a lifetime to change the minds and hearts of some people. But in the short term, I can help on changing the practices. And so on a school board where you're dealing with a lot of issues that are having a lot to do with their students, with the curriculum, with the finance, with the buildings, I mean, you name it, it's in little cities. I mean, if you're dealing with everything, I am actually okay with sometimes changing the practices. And knowing that I can't fault people for the experiences that they haven't had, and I don't want people to fault me for the experiences I haven't had. And that comes up. It shows up in our conversations. We really do sometimes see things with different lens. And I can't fault people for not seeing things. Or sometimes I think to myself, they don't get it. But what is there to get? My experience is different than theirs, and they're probably looking at me, she didn't get it. And so I think that that's really important, to try to think about, well, what's doable? And I do feel that there are times where you do get to that mind and heart if you stick at it. I was at a very different place 4 years ago when I started on the school board, and where I'm at now. I can genuinely tell you that I work with colleagues who I don't doubt that their heart is in a good place. I do not doubt it ever. We don't agree on everything, but I don't doubt that, and that's been really important for me in thinking about the work we move forward. And I mean, recently I was surprised where we had a hot topic issue. We have those regularly, but it was about a charter school. And there was a comment that was made in public comment that talked about wanting to recruit Latinos and wanting to go to laundromats on the east side and west side to recruit Latino students. And you know, it's a comment that kind of hurt. Again, I think the person who said it meant well, but it kind of hurt for me. Because I thought, gosh, we're like 38% of this community. Like, that's the only place we're going to find Latinos at laundromats? And you know, there's two things that happened. One, I realized that it was beautiful when someone who wasn't a Latina heard the comments and caught it and said something. And we were able to have with one of my colleagues, I said, thank you for hearing it. And she told me, you know, I really should have said something, I just didn't know how. But it really created a teachable moment, because I said, you know, I would have loved for you to have said something, because they'll hear it differently from you than they will from me. And so that's a big change from where I started on the school board 4 years ago to where we're at now. We're having these conversations where we all evolve. They see me as an ally, and I'm seeing them as an ally. It's no longer, you know, this kind of like, which issues can we move forward? On the reverse side, I said, you know what? I'm going to invite this person to coffee that made a comment. And I did. And we met and we had coffee. Really good human being. And I explained why that comment just didn't feel right. And why there was something inside me that, you know, yeah, you know, that comment, can we think about this differently? Can we think about why it might have offended some people? And it was a great conversation because, again, it was teachable. It was a teachable moment, but at the same time, I really felt like I was changing at that point the mind of someone. Like, this person didn't mean to say that, or didn't mean to come off in the way that, you know, this person might have come off. But that was a good moment. And again, part of this was also thinking about, well, how do I strategize from this? I mean, I have to do a lot of strategy as far as the issues that come to the board. But I realized that one of my strategies has really been to learn how to place a good question. Sometimes it's not just about stating the facts in the comment, it's asking that right question at the right time. That question that doesn't imply an answer. The question that's genuinely seeking input and feedback. I think sometimes we ask questions and we know what we want the answer to be. But when you ask that question and you're open to listening to people's feedback, you'd be surprised. You can take really tough conversations about race, about poverty, about inequality. And it doesn't mean that it's easy, please don't, by any means it's not easy, but you can have these questions framed where those that are at the table don't necessarily feel if they speak out there's a right or wrong answer. They feel that it's a safer space to have this conversation. So that really has been one of my strategies. I also know that it's not about getting everything I want. It's not about what Monique Limon wants. It really has to be about what's right for the students. And that's important for me to think about. You know, when issues come forward, my strategy needs to be about, well, is this a unique issue, or is this an issue that's really in the best interest for the students? And there's times where, you know, we all have our passions, we're all interested, and, you know, we just have to be aware that we don't always get what we want. I think, you know, I talked about awareness and being aware of who you are, what you bring to the table, and also those experiences, the life skills I think that you bring to the table. I think we really do. There are positive kind of added value things that we bring to the table, perspectives, and I think that that's important. And, you know, one of my coping strategies is truthfully sometimes just speaking to other women. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much this has helped me in the process to speak to other women, to talk about what it's like to be a leader. Many of you in the room are individuals, males and females, who I've had conversations with. I feel like I'm constantly learning from my colleagues, constantly learning from community members, from leaders. I don't know that everyone who is a leader needs to have a special title. I see leaders within my family, and I really learn from them. But it is actually refreshing to sometimes have a conversation, you know, and just say, yeah, thank you so much for getting it. Thank you for like making me feel like I'm not totally out there, you know, that this really does happen. That sometimes women have to work twice as hard, and sometimes Latina women have to work even harder. This is real. We experience it, and we're not alone in thinking about it. And it doesn't mean we don't have men as allies. Please, a lot of the men who have mentored, a lot of men have been mentors to me. And so I think it's also important to have a process. I joke around because occasionally, you know, part of my processing when we have tough issues is also to listen to a little Jenny Rivera. You know, I'm like, gosh, that woman is empowering. You know, and for those of you who don't know who Jenny Rivera is, let's just put it this way: she's a female banda singer who is one of the only in her genre who my mother would not approve of. Right? I mean, that's the best way to put who she is. So I think, you know, in closing, for me, I think when collaborations and alliances, again, are part of what we do every day. We use these skills in our everyday lives, but we also are able to apply them and bring them to the table in our professional lives. I try really hard for it not to be a us versus them, and to think about how do we do this together. We have to do it together, especially right now when education is so tough. And I don't like to fault people, again, for not having the experiences I've had. And at the end of the day, what helps me sleep, even if I didn't, you know, see the outcome that I wanted on the school board, even if it was a really tough meeting, even if I came home and I needed to process with my husband because it was one of those meetings, is knowing that I am in this for the students, and it's coming from here. My leadership comes from here. And the day that changes might be the day that I stop doing what I do in the community, but I'm able to sleep at night. And that's important to me, and that keeps me focused, and truthfully, it's sometimes the energy that I need to get through some of these crazy moments that I think we all have, whether it's in a boardroom, in a conference room, in a classroom, you know, outside on the field, but I think we all have these moments in different capacities, so thank you. Thanks, Monique, and we do like your hand movement. I think everyone like that. You know, we've heard a lot of different things today, and I know that when the panelists arrived, we talked about, wow, you know, is information going to be duplicated? And not at all. We heard some just great information from each and every one of you, from the education sector, from Monique running for, you know, board member, Judy being part of the corporate sector, and we had, you know, we heard some really valuable advice. We heard about synergy, about bringing different voices, listening, how collaboration takes time. Sometimes it doesn't happen. You know, placing good questions and leading from within. All these topics were covered today. And so I know that you all have many questions, or you're thinking about things right now. And so while you do that, I'd like to ask our panelists if they could please join us up here. And I'd like to start off with the first question, and when you get settled, just get things going. You know, when thinking of the panel that was going to be here and the different experiences you all have had, to me, I just can't help but ask this question because I think it's very relevant to the group that is here today. And I'm just wondering if any of you have experienced any challenges in building consensus among diverse populations when you're not representing that majority. I'm just really curious about that because I think with the changing demographics here in Santa Barbara, that is something. And even when we were taking RSVPs to this event, people asked, you know, is there going to be a lot of Latinas that go there, and can I get them involved with such and such organization and so forth? So I'm just curious to hear your perspective on that. You know, Lori, would you address that question, please?
So let me make sure I understand the question, so I'm going to read it back to you. Have we experienced situations where we can't build that collaborative, that it fails or it isn't successful is probably a better way of saying it, because of diverse perspectives? Is that?
No, actually I should clarify that. No, so if you're trying to reach consensus building, say with, I'll just put it out there, with the Latino group for
Okay.
you, would there be any challenges, or would you approach it differently? I'm just curious to hear your take on that.
Okay. I think to frame it, and I've got to put it in the context of Santa Barbara City College, which is an institution of 25,000 students and probably 1,000 employees. We were recently, several years ago, reached a very important benchmark, and that is being a Hispanic serving institution. That's a federal designation. And our efforts have very much focused on inclusion and on providing opportunities for all. And in reaching out to the first generation college going students and in ensuring that the top 100% of those students who want to come to Santa Barbara City College are embraced. And that requires a diversity of perspective and insight and experience and background. So when I think about trying to build a consensus or trying to get to a point that might have as a framework a focus on an underrepresented population or something like that, I can't fathom not creating a framework that allows for those different perspectives to be recognized and involved. So I may be at a 30,000-foot level and you want a specific level, but I don't think I would approach it any differently other than to ensure that those voices are heard, whether it's gender differences, ethnicity differences, differences in religion, if it has to be a religious perspective or a religious decision. I just see that that's part and parcel of the academic environment.
Thank you. Judy or Monique, I'd love to hear from one of you who wants to tackle that on that same question.
Well, one of the things that is interesting for me in the corporate world is, depending on the situation, gender plays a big role, especially in the financial industry, and to be able to be taken seriously and to be listened to. I think often about the manner in which I'm approaching something. I'm not only a woman, I'm also a woman of color. And I don't want that to get in the way of our conversation. So I often think about how I'm positioning myself, what I'm saying, how I say it. You know, when you said, Monique, about using your hands or whatever, they're thinking about even just sometimes the analogies I use or the way I frame something, so that I'm hoping that someone can relate to the way I'm speaking. Is I need to think about my audience. And that happens all the time. You know, as a woman of color, I've been in many instances where I'm the only woman of color there. You know, you need to think about your audience. There's other times where, you know, you're somewhere and your difference isn't that apparent, but all of a sudden you realize oh, what I took for granted was happening isn't happening. So I do think it's important to think about your audience, how you frame what you say, and to think of the ways that you can, in speaking, connect with them. So, and there's many different ways to play that out.
Thank you. Monique, did you want to add anything? I see like you're ready to jump in.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that it's also, when we think about diversity, there's so much diversity even within the Latino community. And so even sometimes tackling the issues within the Latino community, and when I hear from parents, we're not all on the same side sometimes. But I absolutely believe that it's a process. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough, that sometimes it's just that patience of kind of going through a process and allowing, you may not be able to achieve what you're looking for or build some level of consensus in 2 or 3 meetings. I mean, it's taken me 4 years for some issues. And so, it's a process that I think we have to go through. The listening piece, I think, is another piece that has been said multiple times. But for me, as I shared, it's also, for good or bad, there is a sense of awareness for me, for what I bring to the table, what I look like, what I sound like, and how I present the issue. It's realistic. I don't want to say that everyone should then go out. I mean, I wish it wasn't that way, but it's just real. It's real in my life. It may not be real in the life of others, but that's something that I deal with.
So what questions do you have? What's on your mind as you're hearing these women talk? Does anything really jump out at you? What are your curiosities? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, comments, questions. We have these amazing women here, so let's go ahead. Ken.
I wanted to ask, but it seems like one of the big challenges today is there's so many divisive issues where people approach them from a parochial me place, and the conversation becomes richer when we can help people get to a we place. And I was wondering what you all have found that supports people in doing that.
Who would like to tackle that?
I'll try. For me, it's really important to keep your eye on the ball, and that ball is the greater perspective, whether it's our mission. Monique has said it many, many times that what is the nexus for you is what's in the best interest of the students, and that's very similar to us as well. And so you're absolutely right, particularly in academia, there are departments, or there are colleges, or there are structures that are inherently like silos, very parochial. But if we can really ground ourselves in our common purpose, and I'm very strategic about how I do that, and that means I have our mission statement on every single place. I have it with a picture. Michael is shaking his head, but that was strategic so that it would remind us it's not just about the math department, and I love math, not just about the math department, it's about the greater whole, the greater good, the common good. And I keep reminding us of that. I try not to let groups get in the weeds. I try and keep them at 10 to 20,000 foot level if we're doing an institutional-wide decision. Because once you start getting in the weeds, you get too mired in that, the kind of the me perspective. That's just couple techniques.
It's interesting as I listen to Lori think about being in the corporate boardroom, and we have the same problem. We have a senior management team of, there's 13 of us. There's an executive team, a senior management team, and each of the senior managers runs an area, whether it be credit or lending or their banks or different things. And it's easy for them to get siloed. So we talk about something that's an important issue for the bank overall, and all of a sudden they're right here. Oh, how does this affect me? Or what's this going to mean to me? And you see everybody kind of get there and you think, wow, we're never going to be able to get here, which is, as senior leaders, we have to be thinking, what is the best for the organization overall? And then being able to say next, after we make that sort of more universal decision, how does it affect me in my silo? But it is really difficult to get people to stop thinking about their department, if we do this, and that means I'm going to do this, or we're going to cut this, or that's where people go in terms of that natural place. So it takes a lot to keep helping people say, you gotta get up, and we use that, get up to 30,000, you know. People like to be in the weeds. And so it's really difficult to get people to rise and say, we've got to look at it from the bigger picture. And so what you're saying is an educational institution, I'm saying that's happening on the corporate level. Every single time we walk in that boardroom, we talk about decisions that we're making, or strategic planning, or business plan. So it comes down to, it feels exactly the same as what you're saying.
Thank you. In the back, Beatriz.
Somebody spoke about the common good, and my question goes to, what about when the common good that is embraced by the majority is absolutely diametrically opposed to what you believe is truly the common good, although it may upset the status quo? And at that point, how specific processes that you may use to move the conversation into a common ground where both parties are seeing perhaps the negativity or the misunderstanding of the other side, trying to get them to a position where truly the greater good is embraced by data and social mores is moving forward.
What do you think about that? This common good?
You know, it's in the setting where I work in, it's actually pretty, difficult, because on the one end, you think about, we have this kind of motto that our superintendent says, every child, every chance, every day. And so that would lead you to think that, well, we have to think about the individual, but then you talk about the common good. That is, I think that one of the things to talk about is to make sure that your body of leaders is also comes at it from different lens. Do I sometimes feel like I challenge the status quo? Yep. How I do it is important to me, as you've heard, but we have to have those leaders. And this is where we talk about how we cultivate leadership. Leadership has to be really individuals who can see things from different lenses, and not just the ethnicity part. The ethnicity is one thing; it's a very obvious thing, I think, for people. But I'm talking about true different lens. I didn't realize also just my generational perspective that I would bring. I'm the most recent. I've been in the classroom, a lot closer. I'm yeah, that's not what the classroom's like anymore. I was I've kind of been in the classroom a little bit more recently. So I think that it's important to make sure that we do allow individuals with different lenses to be at the decision-making table. I don't think challenging the status quo is bad. I always worry when challenging the status quo becomes this talk and this conflict that is leading no one to anywhere. And that's very difficult. And I think in the school district, we have definitely, there is a lot of challenging the status quo that is happening, but it's probably not enough for some folks, and I don't think it needs to be conflicted. I think that there are ways to move forward, through working with people. But in some ways, I also look at all of you and think of your role in having those people serve in leadership capacities, and how we are cultivating as a community those leaders. I know it's really easy to write off folks in elected office. I get it. I was one of those people that used to do it. I swore I would never become a politician. But we have a role, folks. We have a role as a community, and so if we feel like there is an issue, then we have to actually find those leaders that can be somehow a voice for those issues to move forward.
And so how do we start creating these decision makers? How do you seek out these decision makers when you're looking into boards and creating a more diverse board? How do you start doing that? Here we have a wide range of audience, different ages, different experiences, levels, and so forth. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I'll give you some examples. In the school district, we used to have more meetings than we do now that we're meeting at certain times. And I realized, if someone has a full-time job, they can't meet at that time. So let's, starting to change our practices. Remember, I talked about practices. I can't change people's minds all the time, but changing those practices to make them more inclusive. I think it's absolutely our responsibility. When I'm making recommendations to not just school district boards, but to community boards, there's a role. I see some folks out there that I'm like, yeah, I kind of push them, like, I think you'd be great on this board. What do you think? But it's also been done with me, because I look out in the audience and I look at the folks that have pushed me to serve in the community, to think about what our role is, and it's about, I think, nurturing, cultivating, and voicing ideas about how those bodies that make decisions at any particular level can perhaps have a different lens. But I think it's really not just sitting back and being passive about it.
Anything else that you'd like
I'd
to
like
hear?
to add a little.
Oh, go for it.
Being on the opposite end of being, 40 or some years ago from the classroom, I think there's also a responsibility when I look around this audience to think of those of us who are older and need to help mentor those people to be decision makers. There's an accountability and responsibility. I love hearing what you said, Lori, about how many I feel the same way in terms of some of the greatest joy I have is in helping people, young people, find their leadership, what's within them, find the strengths and skills they have. I believe it's a real responsibility for us to help develop leaders within our community. I was born in this community. This community matters a tremendous amount to me. To me, I want voices, to help cultivate voices to represent lots of different views in this community. It doesn't feel the same community I was born into because it's changed a lot, but it's still a community I really love in a very profound way. So I feel that there's an accountability for me that I need to help with those decision makers. I'm on lots of boards. I have to think when we're saying, who should we bring in as a board member, there's a responsibility for me to think about, who should we bring in? What are names I should bring in? How can I help develop some of those people to be parts of many, when you look at our nonprofit boards in this town, that are going to be taking, my place down that road of my generation. It's our responsibility. So I think that again, we need to look inside ourselves and say, what are we doing to help mentor those decision makers you're talking about?
Thank you. There was a question in the back. Oh,
Very
yes,
quickly,
please.
I think, I'm sorry, I don't know your name back there, but you asked a very powerful question. Beatrice? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have a hearing impairment, so I apologize. But you asked a really, really essential question. And for me, it boils down to two elements. And the first element is that for us in public education, we are stewards of the public's trust, and we're stewards of the students' trust, and we're stewards of the taxpayers' trust. And for that, I shoulder a huge responsibility relative to the common good. And I think about the common good a lot, because there are special interests, as Monique knows, that come to you constantly. Probably the most notable that played out in this community several years ago was adult education, continuing education. And that was very, very difficult. So on the one hand, I feel a profound responsibility as a steward. And then on the other hand, for the past 34 years, I've developed a strong personal ethic and integrity about what I believe in my profession as an educator is the right path. And not only a personal integrity, but an institutional integrity. That I am leading an institution that has a very clear mission and purpose. And to deviate from that is simply not right. So I have the strength and inner being to stand up to that majority, if you will. And I'm not talking continuing ed right now, but it could be anything. It could be curriculum or whatever. And to work toward a better place for the common whole, for the whole.
Thank you.
I appreciate that response. It was very thorough. Thank you.
Wendy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a question about how has your path of leadership impacted your lives and sensitivity? What are the lessons that you learned along the way?
Can you repeat that?
how has your path to leadership impacted alliance and consensus building, and any lessons learned along the way?
Judy, can you touch on that, please?
You know, many of us are leaders in this group. Some of us are formal because that's what we've been designated as being, but all of us have the capacity to lead. And when I think about myself in terms of leadership, all the organizations I've been involved with, the people I meet, many of you with whom I've interacted over time, you know, it's been critical for me in that alliance building to have a leadership role, to help define it, to help understand it. So it's just played such an integral part. It's hard to say exactly, but what I've learned is really about that there's so many leaders within a body, and that people need to figure out how to develop that so they can be part of the alliance building. It's how that inclusiveness that you talked about earlier, how we get people to feel like they too can be passionate, or they too can be represented, or they too can make a difference. That to me has been, how do you move that apathetic middle that doesn't feel like that? How do you do that? What do you do? I think leadership is part of that.
And Gracie, you had your hand up.
I have a little bit of a big personal question actually. You know, as someone who's in a position sometimes to advocate and to do it against a pretty tough audience, it's exhausting, and I'm kind of tired right now. So I'm just wondering, how do you deal with the emotional heaviness of having to constantly be advocating?
It's a great question. Maureen, would you?
It is a fabulous question. I don't mean to sound trite about this. Well, let me begin, and I don't want to offend any men in the room at all. But I think women are different kinds of leaders. We're wired a little bit differently. We have our radar focused in a different way. We are, I believe, more sensitive to certain elements of the human-to-human interaction and engagement. And we wear that. We embrace it. Things don't go off our skin and our surface very easily, and I can see it in your face. And yet, as my colleagues have shared, we need to be taken seriously. So I'm going to share something. This isn't about you. I fell in love with one of my, not literally, but with one of my colleagues when I was president at a college in Northern California. I just loved her. I mean, she was a new professional, and she had a lot of enthusiasm, but she would show her wearing on her face, broke down, crying, in group situations, and I had to say, Inga, don't Google Inga at my other college. Don't do that, because you've got such great skills, strengths, talents, and gifts that people need to see, and they'll only see your face and your tears and the red, how we all the women get red, I get red and things like that. When I'm really angry and I'm in a meeting, I'm sure Michael has seen this. But you've got to learn to process that differently and outside the scope of a public setting. Lord knows I've had to deal with that, and I do not have a poker face. And I suspect if you watched any of the board meetings that are televised, I'm just but then I find a way to release, and whether, as Monique said, it's with a person who is important to you, or whether it's running and meditating as you run, or whether it's having that ice cream or that pizza, and I mean that very seriously. You've got to find a way to process and not internalize. But I will also say being a leader is incredibly lonely. Incredibly lonely. And while I do have confidants, no one really gets it what you're walking in your shoes. So I don't have an easy answer other than to find somebody that you can play off of, and I'm going to give you my cell phone.
What do you? So, I mean, I absolutely would agree that it can be very difficult, and I feel like if you're in my inner circle, you have seen me actually shed tears in the last 4 years about the work that I do on the school board. I pretend that I'm much more confident than I am sometimes. I really do. But there are things I take home, and usually the reasons I can't sleep don't have to do with how I may have voted, but they have to do with process. And I think I think one, just acknowledging that it's real, like acknowledging that there are things that really do bring tears to us, and there have been some hard and complicated issues. And I grew up in an environment where family is core to what I do, and I have to tell you that besides having loved ones and friends, other women, so important, a husband to process with, I look at my nieces and nephews and younger cousins. For me, sometimes I just look and spend time with them because they remind me. I tell a story a lot of a younger cousin named Victoria, who, when I was running for office, her mom was telling me the story about how she would go around and count all the lawn signs on her way to school every single day. And she already knew where they were. She's like, that house has it, that house has it, that house has it, that house does not have a lawn sign, right? And I realized that, this cousin, she's a younger cousin of mine, like, it's gonna be real for her. Like, she's not gonna doubt herself as much as I did. She's not going to question whether she should be in public office. Like, it's just real. It's a new reality to her, and a reality that I didn't have. I questioned, I asked for permission. I thought so hard and long before I ran for office. And so I actually have to draw from those moments that are somewhere in my memory to remind me, you know what, this is why you're doing the work. You've changed someone's reality. Maybe not everyone's reality, but someone is actually seeing life differently. They're seeing a possibility and opportunity that they never saw. And that I look at my family, and like, so many of us were like, wow, this is they told me I was crazy, for running for office. And so I think that has actually been something else that I draw upon, because those moments are real, and they happen probably more often than I'd like for them to happen.
I can't help but smile because Victoria happens to be my daughter.
If you didn't know, Tia Guillen, I call her Tia.
Yeah. Any other questions? Judy, please.
I often say to people to think about your body like a stroke bank. And when I think about my body as a stroke bank, and a stroke being something positive that either you give yourself or someone else gives yourself, or something that you love that fills you. And it's important to think about how full you are, especially the more complex thing you're going to do or the more difficult. So if you're filled to the brim, to the top of your head, you're probably ready to take on a lot of things. But it's like there's a spigot at the bottom, and you go in and somebody sucked the life out of you in that meeting, and I'm a little bit lower and I get lower. So you need to think about how you empty and fill. Who empties me? What empties me? What are the things that suck the life out of me? So when I think about it, is you have to constantly think about what are the things that fill me, and pay attention to how high or low I am. So if I have something that's waist high, I got to start thinking about, wait a second, I need to get more full. I shouldn't tackle that particular thing if I'm only that low. And if there's no choice and I have to tackle it, I better be starting to think about a refuel. I got to go to McConnell's, or I got to go for a run. Or for me, I got to go pet my dog and hold my grandson. I mean, what are the things that bring me joy? What are the positive things I can say to myself about myself? Who are the people? I call my friend Sharon and say, I just need to hear your voice and you make me feel better. I mean, what are those things? Because if you're too low, you can't do this. You can't do the work you need to do. Not in a way that's professional, appropriate, and in a manner So I just would say to you, think about your body as a bank of positiveness, and when you pay attention to how high or low you are, and if you're emptying, think about how it got emptied, and if you can avoid that, that's great. But some of the things we can't avoid, and other things, but we can keep filling up.
I love your analogy of that. One last question. We're getting close to the end of our program. I'm looking at the clock because I know that our panelists have another event to attend to.
Get Cecilia in front.
Cecilia,
And it can be, for time's sake, somebody just wants to answer this. A specific example of how you created trust and transparency in your organization.
For me, it was empowering people. And that takes, that's manifested in so many different ways. But it's in one's words, one's actions, and one's deeds, and in one's being and philosophy, and it's empowering for me.
Judy, did you want to?
Well, I completely think it's that empowerment, and I also think it's really walking the walk, having the integrity. People know when you're phony. People know when you're not really honest. People know when they're giving them one answer and behaving another way. So you really need to look in that mirror and say, am I behaving in a way that I feel good about looking in the mirror, and do I have integrity? Because people pick up on that, and as soon as that's a big question, that trust and respect that we were talking about earlier, as soon as that big question, I don't care what you do, it's gone. It's really hard. It's like I used to say to my kids, I'll trust you till I don't. If you give me a reason to, it's going to take a while to get back. It's also true in our work life. I walk in trusting. I mean, that just happens to be who I am and how I am in the world. But I also have to be someone they can trust. So I have to look in that mirror and think, am I behaving in integrity? Am I compromising what I think is a common good, or whatever it is? Am I behaving in ways that are transparent? You can see it, you can feel it, you can taste it, what's happening.
And for me, I think along with empowerment and integrity is also authenticity. And authenticity is everything that I bring to the table, imperfections and not. And I think that that's been one way that I've been able to build trust with my colleagues, for them to see me for who I really am. And it's not always someone who gets the answer right the first time. It's not always it's a little bit of everything, and being authentic. And I think it feels risky sometimes, because you're like, they're going to see that I really do use my hands all the time, right? And I'm not just holding them down or whatever. But I think it's important. I really feel that's how I've been able to build allies on the school board and come to consensus by being authentic and being me.
Wow, we've heard a lot of great insight and perspective. And what I love about this panel is that they really keep it real, when it's not only just focusing about the professional aspect, but they also talk about really taking care of yourself as the individual. Because if you're not well in here, how can you be well out there? So I think you shed a lot of different light on this very important topic. And one other theme that I saw in many of your responses was that truly, without collaborations and consensus building, that there's not much that can be accomplished, because it takes that. And in Spanish, we have this saying that juntos logramos más, together we can achieve so much more. And I think it's very relevant. So I really want to thank Lori, Judy, and Monique for being here. It's not every day that we have the opportunity to have these Q&A sessions, to have community come together. Usually it's for a specific topic, moving an issue, trying to build consensus and so forth. But this is information sharing. This is a wonderful knowledge session, because that's what it's all about. It's what can we learn through them for the benefit of all of us here today. And I encourage all of us to do this more frequently, to get together and be able to have these just very honest conversations, because it just feels really good. So thank you all very, very much. Our panelists, if we could please I'm just so pleased to see such a full room with business, corporate, education, government, students, you name it, they're all here. And what a wonderful platform for this conversation. Thank you, and I encourage you to please take a flyer, your name is and find out more about the Santa Barbara Latina Leaders Network. We really welcome the opportunity to partner with other organizations to see how we could build more community, because that's truly what it's all about. And I urge you to take one of these, check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, and so forth. So have a very wonderful evening, and thank each and every one of